My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase, and in this episode, we are finally going to do something we have been circling around from the very beginning. We are going to walk straight into the throne room of modern physics and ask the king to step down. That king is energy. Before we start, I want to explain something honestly. Back in episode 2, I already whispered a dangerous question. Is energy really the fundamental stuff of reality? At that point, you did not yet know what holophase is. You did not know what F is, or what it means to say that reality is a rhythmic order rather than a substance. If, at that early stage, I had tried to dismantle energy as the ontic substrate of the universe, I would essentially be saying, forget the one thing modern physics told you is real, and trust me on something you've never heard of yet. That would not be fair to you. So we waited. In episode 3, we took our time to introduce holophase itself, this strange, deeper idea that reality is not made of particles or fields or energy, but of an underlying phase structure, a continuous rhythm F, from which time, space, motion, fields, and energy all emerge as different ways of reading the same pattern. Now that you have met F, now that you've seen how holophase treats reality as a single oscillatory order, we are finally ready to go back, turn around, and look directly at the old king, energy. In this episode, I want to do 3 things with you. First, show you, slowly and clearly, how energy became so sacred in our science and culture. It did not fall from the sky, it earned its crown. Second, look very carefully at what we actually do when we say, this system has energy. What measurements do we make? What numbers do we combine? What are we really talking about? And third, show you how holophase reinterprets energy, not as the substance of reality, but as a beautiful, precise, but secondary summary of something deeper, the phase structure F. If that sounds a bit technical, stay with me. I promise to keep the language simple, and I will keep talking to you like a person, not a textbook. Under the hood, the science will be rigorous, but the story will feel like you and I are sitting together, looking at reality from a new angle. Let's begin with the first question. How did energy become king? Imagine Europe in the early industrial age. Coal mines, steam engines, heavy iron machines. People are discovering that by burning black rocks dug out of the ground, they can pump water, drive spinning wheels, move trains, and reshape landscapes. At first, nobody uses the word energy the way we do today. They talk about work, effort, heat, power. They see that burning coal makes water boil. Boiling water makes steam. Steam pushes a piston. The piston turns a wheel. The wheel pulls a train. One process turns into another and another and another. If you stand back and look at a steam engine, what you see is a chain of changes. Fire turning into steam, steam into motion, motion into lifting or pushing. To the people building these machines, it feels like something invisible is flowing through the system. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but some kind of transferable capacity to cause change. Imagine a careful observer following the engine with a notebook. Coal burned here, water heated there, piston moved here, weight lifted there. They do not see energy itself, but they begin to realize that there is a common thread through all of these events. Later, scientists like Joule, Carnot, and Clausius make this more precise. They start performing careful experiments, drop a weight, make paddles spin in water, measure how much the water heats up, compress a gas, see how its temperature changes, run a current through a wire, see how hot it gets. Again and again, they find that if you account for all the ways something can change, motion, heat, position, compression, electricity, there is a certain combination of numbers that stays the same. You can lose motion and gain heat. You can lose height and gain speed. You can lose chemical stored capacity and gain light. But when you add it all correctly, using the right formulas, the total remains constant. That special combination of numbers is what we now call energy. This is the moment where the concept shifts from vague intuition to scientific royalty. Energy is defined mathematically as the thing that stays conserved when you include all its forms. It is not initially defined as the substance of reality. It is defined as the quantity that never disappears. You can picture an accountant wandering through every process in nature with an invisible ledger. Whenever something moves, heats, lights up, compresses, expands, vibrates, sends waves, the accountant writes numbers in different columns. When the process is done, If he has used the right rules, the total of all columns is unchanged. That total is energy. Now put yourself in the shoes of physicists at that time. You could be forgiven for thinking, if there is one thing that never disappears, maybe that is what reality really is. After all, gods and spirits had come and gone. Ether came and went. Different elements had been proposed and then revised. But energy just kept showing up in everything: engines, waves, chemistry, electricity, gravity. And no experiment ever found a process that violated energy conservation. It is extremely tempting at this point to say everything else is just surface. Energy is the real thing underneath. But let's slow down. How do we get the number that we call energy in the first place? When we say this object has kinetic energy, we don't look inside the object and see little packets of energy substance floating around. We measure its mass and its speed, and then we plug those numbers into a formula. When we say a stretched spring has potential energy, we measure how far it's stretched and how stiff it is. And again, we combine those into a formula. When we say light carries energy, we measure its frequency, or how intense it is over time and area. And from those measurements, we compute a number. Energy is always computed from other observables. Always. Mass and velocity, position and force, field strength and configuration, frequency and amplitude, pressure and volume, current and voltage. In every case, energy is not something you measure directly. It is something you calculate. Here is a simple analogy. Imagine a football match. The players are running, kicking, passing, tackling. People are shouting and cheering. The ball is moving around the field. Then look up at the scoreboard. It shows 2-1. The number 2-1 is extremely important. It tells you which team is ahead. It tells you who is closer to winning. But it is not a physical object on the field. It is a compressed summary of all the goals scored so far according to the rules of the game. It is a powerful, meaningful summary, but it is not the game itself. Energy is like the scoreboard. Reality is full of moving patterns, particles, fields, waves, phase relations, configurations. We choose formulas based on our best theories that assign numbers to those patterns. Those numbers often obey beautiful, simple rules like conservation, but those numbers are summaries. This does not make energy unreal. The scoreboard is real. If you change the score, you change who wins. But if you try to understand football only in terms of the scoreboard, you will eventually hit nonsense. You need to see the passes, the tackles, the strategies, the geometry, the players. Likewise, if you try to think of reality as made of nothing but energy, eventually you hit confusion. You lose the underlying structure that energy is summarizing. Another analogy that makes this clear is money. Money is one of the most powerful abstractions humans have ever invented. With money, you can compare apples and oranges, houses and phones, 1 hour of work, and a piece of software. Money allows you to exchange very different things using a single metric, price. Over time, people can begin to feel that everything is money. They start saying things like, time is money, knowledge is money, attention is money. In a certain shallow sense, you can translate almost any decision into a money decision. But you and I know that money is not the substance of reality. You cannot eat money. A bank account with 10 million in it but no food in the country will not feed anyone. Money is a map of value, not value itself. It is a human device built on top of deeper things. Human needs, physical resources, skills, relationships, land, water, energy. Holophase tells us energy plays a role similar to money. Energy is a universal bookkeeping tool. It allows us to track how different forms of change compensate each other. It tells us what is possible and what is impossible in engines, in stars, in circuits, in chemical reactions. But energy is not by itself the stuff of existence. It is a number we assign to deeper patterns. So what are those deeper patterns? In our current mainstream framework, we say fields and particles in space-time. We imagine a four-dimensional stage called space-time, and on that stage, live various quantum fields and particles. When the fields are configured in certain ways, we compute energy from their configuration. When particles move in certain ways, we compute energy from their motion. When space-time curves, we compute energy densities and pressures that drive that curvature. But notice, even in this picture, energy is still downstream. We start with fields, particles, geometry, and then we compute energy densities from them. Energy is not filling spacetime like a fluid fills a tank. It is a tally we assign to the state of fields and geometry. Holophase goes a step further and asks, what if even fields and geometry are not the starting point? What if there is a more primitive layer underneath them? A layer in which what is fundamental is not how much stuff there is, but how the underlying phase is ordered and how that order changes. This brings us back to F, the holophase. In the holophase model, the most basic ingredient of the universe is not little bits of stuff and not a smooth sheet of energy density. It is a single continuous field of phase, a way of assigning where you are in a cycle to every location in the underlying domain. The deep ontic object is not how much, but where in the rhythm. This might sound abstract, so let's bring it down. Think about a simple wave, the rising and falling of a water surface, or the up and down pattern of a vibrating string. When you look at such a wave, you can describe it in two ways. You can talk about amplitude, how high the wave is at each point, and compute energy from that. Or you can talk about phase, where each point is in its cycle of up and down. If two waves overlap, whether they add up or cancel depends on their phase. If they are in phase, they reinforce. If they are out of phase, they can cancel. In optics, this is how interference patterns appear. Bright and dark fringes on a screen are nothing but phase differences turning into intensity patterns. In quantum physics, phase is even more crucial. The probabilities of different outcomes depend on relative phases in the wave function. Interference, entanglement, tunneling, all of these fundamentally involve phase. You cannot explain them with energy alone. The energy might be the same, but under different phase relations, you get completely different outcomes. Yet our everyday intuition is built on energy. We picture energy flowing or energy stored or energy released. We don't picture phase weaving patterns. Holophase says, flip this around, treat F, the global phase structure, as the primary reality. Treat energy as a secondary quantity that you compute from how F behaves under certain symmetries and changes. Energy becomes a derived tally of how the underlying rhythm flexes, not the rhythm itself. Here is one more deep, slightly mind-bending feature of F that we will explore more later, but I want to mention it already because it is so central. F itself is invisible. Nobody ever directly sees F. We never open a box and see the phase glowing inside. What we see in every experiment, in every device, are differences and derivatives of F. Phase differences between two paths in an interferometer. Phase gradients across space. Phase changes over time. Interference fringes, beats between frequencies. These are all shadows of F's changes, not F itself. You can compare this to temperature again. You never see temperature in isolation. You feel hot or cold because of how energy moves between your body and the environment. Temperature is a way of summarizing the statistical behavior of many microscopic motions. It is an emergent descriptor. With F, the situation is even more subtle. F itself, as a cyclic order, cannot be read absolutely. What you can read are differences. How much F has changed between here and there, between now and later, between one path and another. The entire visible universe, from this perspective, is made of contrasts in phase, not phase itself. This is actually good news for us. It means that holophase is not a mystical add-on. It is exactly aligned with what we already do in physics. When you reconstruct a wave field in optics, or when you infer the phase of a quantum state, you never get F in isolation. You get it up to a constant through interference patterns, through differences. So, when holophase says F is the ontic substrate, it does not mean we will now see F floating in front of us like a magical glow. It means we will treat the entire network of phase relations, which we already work with every day in our instruments, as the real foundation, and treat energy as one of the summaries we build from those relations. Let's come back to energy one more time and be as fair as possible. Why is it so hard emotionally and intellectually to accept that energy is not the final word? Because energy has an incredible track record. It explains why engines cannot be more efficient than a certain limit. It explains why perpetual motion machines of the first kind are impossible. It explains why stars shine for billions of years and how much fuel they must burn. It explains why nuclear bombs release so much power from such a small amount of matter. It connects all these phenomena in a single conceptual web. Holophase does not deny any of that. If Holophase could not recover energy conservation in all the usual domains, it would be dead on arrival. A theory that cannot explain why engines work and stars shine is not worth talking about. So Holophase accepts the conservation laws but reinterprets them. Instead of saying energy is conserved because it is the substance of reality, Holophase says energy is conserved because the underlying phase dynamics F has symmetries, and from those symmetries, certain tallies built out of F are conserved. In this view, conservation laws are not properties of a substance. They are reflections of symmetry in a deeper pattern. That deeper pattern is F. Later, when we go into the more technical episodes, we will show this with equations and explicit constructions, how you start with F and its dynamics, then derive from that the quantities that behave like energy and momentum, and show why they obey conservation. For now, it's enough to hold the picture. The king is still powerful, but his crown has a new inscription, derived from F. There is one last point I want to make in this part, because it connects to falsifiability and scientific honesty. It is not enough for Holophase to say energy is derived. It must be possible, at least in principle, to test this. The test is not that energy suddenly stops working. The test is more subtle and more interesting. Whenever we have a situation where energy language becomes confused, ambiguous, or blows up to infinity, Holophase should be able to offer a clearer description in F language. Whenever we have a phenomenon where phase relations are clearly primary, interference, entanglement, geometric phases, topological states, vacuum puzzles, Holophase should give us cleaner, more direct predictions than a pure energy in space-time picture. And, crucially, whenever we have a standard, well-tested energy calculation in mechanics, in thermodynamics, in electromagnetism, in quantum systems, Holophase must be able to reproduce the same numbers by starting from F and working forward. If it fails to do that in any robust, repeatable domain, then Holophase is wrong. That is what keeps this whole project scientific. We are not playing with metaphors. We are proposing a different ground level and saying, if it is real, then you must be able to rebuild everything you already know from that ground, and sometimes see further than before. If you cannot, you must discard the new ground. So where does this leave us at the end of this part? We have seen that energy did not begin as a mystical substance. It began as a conserved number that tracks how different forms of change compensate each other. Energy is always computed from more basic measurements: masses, velocities, fields, frequencies, amplitudes, positions. Energy behaves like an incredibly powerful scoreboard or a universal currency. It summarizes, compares, and constrains, but it is not the game itself nor the land itself. Holophase suggests that the game itself, the raw field of events, is better described in terms of a continuous phase structure F. In that picture, energy emerges as one of F's accounting tools, not as the fabric of reality, and F itself is never directly visible, only its differences are. We live in a universe of phase contrasts, not absolute phase, and all of our measurements already whisper this to us in the language of interference and correlation. In the next part of this episode, we will go further. We will start to show gently, but more explicitly, how common energy formulas in mechanics, in fields, and in quantum systems can be interpreted as different ways of reading F. We will then begin to point out more sharply the places where clinging to energy as substance leads to conceptual dead ends, while F as substrate keeps going. For now, just let this one shift echo in your mind. Energy is not what everything is made of. Energy is what everything adds up to when you look at reality through a certain mathematical lens. Holophase is about taking off that lens for a moment, looking at the raw pattern underneath, and then putting the lens back on, now knowing exactly what it is made of and where its power and its limits come from.